In the January 2021 edition of Beef Monthly and Headline News, we're going to be talking about imports and exports, consumer trends, and fed cattle profitability and break-evens. In the Ask Dr. Ron segment, we're going to be talking about a producer question on drug residues. We also have a segment on chute safety, part 3. And in production and management tips, we're going to be talking about the general cow herd, spring calving, and fall calving herds. In upcoming programs and events, we have many opportunities for producers to gain insight and knowledge. Welcome to the January 2021 edition of Beef Monthly. I'm Dr. Ron Lemonager, Beef Extension Specialist at Purdue University. And now, a word from our good friends at Corteva.
Your land is more than a business. It's a heritage that has been passed down from those who tended it before you, by those who shaped it, changed it, and cared for it. Your land has a legacy, one that you carry on, but also one you build on. At Corteva Agriscience, we are the stewards of a lasting legacy. We have a responsibility to Dow AgroSciences to maintain the relationships and trust they built, and to build upon those foundations, to help you care for your land, to provide innovations that help you protect the hard work and investment you've poured into it, to help you build a legacy that can be passed on for generations to come. Corteva Agriscience.
We begin our program with headline news and a beef industry analysis from Dr. Darrell Peel, ag economist from Oklahoma State University, looking at beef imports and exports. In the first 11 months of the year 2020, overall exports were down about 3.7%. Japan is our #1 exporting country, and we saw a positive 0.75% in the last 11 months. And they represent about 28.5% of our export market. South Korea comes in #2. They were off about 1.2% in the first 11 months, and they represent about 23.2% of our export market. Mexico is #3. They were off significantly at about 31%, and they represent about 10% of our total exports. Canada, it comes in at a positive 6.4% change, and they represent just under 10% of our export market. Hong Kong was off about 5% for the first 11 months, and they represent about 7.5% of our export market. Taiwan and China kind of round out the top 7. The top 5 represent almost 80% of our total export market. On the import side, again for January to November, our overall imports were down about 3.9%. Again, the top 5 trading partners represent about 86% of our total imports. Canada comes in #1. They were off about 2.7%, and they represent just under 25% of our total imports. Australia was #2. They were off about 5%, and they represent about 20% of our total import. Mexico was #3, and they were up about 16%, and they represent, again, about 20% of our total imports. New Zealand was #4, up about 26%, and they represent about 15.5% of our total import. Brazil came in #5, and they were up about almost 34%, and they represent about 6.4%. Nicaragua and Uruguay represent the last 2 in the top 7. In the USDA Market Outlook report, and they expressed exports as a percent of U.S. production. In the case of beef, we export about 11%, just under 11% of our total production. And it's estimated that we'll be a little over 11%, about 11.3% in the year 2021. Pork, on the other hand, was in 2020 exported about 23% of their production, and it's expected that that will rise to just under 26%, okay, in the upcoming year. Broilers were at about 16.5% in 2020, and it will remain about flat for 2021. Same thing is true with turkeys at about 10.3%. There was a white paper that was written on the state of the consumer, and the URL for that, if you want to go to learn more, it's in the show notes below. But in brief, beef purchases being made at least once a week was up from 67 to 72%. More meals are cooked at home, and that meant that there was a demand for a whole lot of new beef recipes. Online ordering, in the case of meals, was up 86%, and groceries, online purchases were up 67% for the last year. Consumers have been focusing on essentials like healthcare products and groceries. That kind of is a good news for those of us in agriculture. A 74% increase in streaming, so people are watching more movies at home. There was a positive consumer perception about beef, and we now have hit a record high of 70% positive consumer perception. Consumers have been stockpiling food. Okay, in the case of ground beef, 55% of the households said that they've been stockpiling ground beef, and 32% of the households say that they've been stockpiling steaks. We also have seen a positive consumer perception about beef production, and it has risen over the last year by 18%. Dr. Mike Langemeier from Purdue Ag Econ has done some work looking at average fed cattle profitability and break-evens. And if we look at last year and the upcoming 2 quarters for 2021, what we see is that fed cattle profitability started out in the first quarter of 19 at about a negative $10 a head. And during the second quarter, it rose to $165 a head. Third quarter, it kind of came back a little bit to $100 a head loss. Fourth quarter, we still were experiencing losses at about $35 a head. It's projected for the first quarter of 2021 that we will be losing about $75, but by the second quarter, hopefully we'll be reaching a break-even profitability. If you look at the break-even dollars per hundredweight, okay, it ranges from $119 a hundredweight in the first quarter of 19, stays relatively steady, drops okay in the third quarter, increases a little bit in the fourth quarter, increases again in the first quarter of 2021, and is projected in the first quarter and the second quarter of 2021, our break-evens are going to be in that $1.17 to $1.20 a pound range. In this month's Ask Dr. Ron, the producer question is, I've heard that there are drug residues in some cattle carcasses. How widespread is this problem? And what do producers need to know to eliminate this problem from the industry? I'd like to welcome Dr. Debbie Boyd, field veterinarian with the Indiana Board of Animal Health, to help me answer this question. Dr. Boyd is a native of Illinois and a graduate of the University of Illinois Veterinary School. Prior to joining the Board of Animal Health, she was a practicing large animal veterinarian in New Hampshire.
So how much of an issue do you think that this drug residue thing is for beef and veal? Is it a big deal?
Yes and no. We see residues, we prefer there not be any residues. And I think Indiana's doing a pretty good job. The numbers at least seems to be decreasing. There were 24 total tissue residues in 2015, and now we're down to 10 in 2019. And that really doesn't seem like very many, considering all the animals that enter the food supply from Indiana. But it's something we still want to work on. We'd like to see the number at 0 if possible. Drug residues are important, because with drug residues, it's harder to have a safe food supply, which is, the goal of most beef producers. They want their animals will enter the food supply, and we want that to be a safe option for people. Drug residues we hope aren't contributing to antibiotic resistance, but we want to eliminate that possibility. And I know from private practice, I didn't want any of my clients getting a visit from the FDA. And I didn't want, anyone getting in trouble and, doing the wrong thing with drugs. So, we worked hard to prevent that.
How do we monitor this whole drug residue thing? Okay, how does that impact us? Okay, as producers, how do we get checked?
Well, they're detected at slaughter, but it starts on the farm. But when animals are sent to slaughter, the plants will do some testing, sometimes at random, sometimes regular surveillance. But specifically, if an animal looks like it could have been treated recently, could have a possible tissue residue. So signs of a recent surgery, sutures, lameness, just poor body condition, breathing heavy, any signs an animal's sick will raise a red flag. And so, they will be tested most likely for drugs. And then when a residue is found, then, they trace that animal back to the farm of origin and the farmer is notified and will probably get a visit from someone.
So, as a veterinarian, you've seen a lot of different situations. Obviously, you've treated sick animals, all those kinds of things. So how do drug residues happen?
There's not one good answer, I guess. There's lots of reasons that they end up at slaughter, but a lot of times, it does seem to come down to human error, lack of focus, not being careful with, the animal that's shipped or confirming an ID, treating the wrong animal by mistake is a reason I have seen. So that sort of thing, not keeping good records, or it can even, be because the labeled withdrawal time wasn't observed. So, maybe somebody didn't realize that the animal wasn't okay to go yet. But then there's also not knowing the proper withdrawal time, and that could be because the drug was used in an extra label manner. And so the withdrawal time on the bottle is no longer correct.
So how does this VCPR, or veterinary client-patient relationship, work? What's the rules and regs for that?
So it's kind of a general term. There are specific sort of a rule, but basically it means that you have a veterinarian who is familiar with your animals and farm and is local enough that they are available for follow-up visits and or emergencies. And again, there isn't any rule saying a vet has to be on the farm so many times per year, or nothing specific like that. But a farmer could ask themselves, do I have a veterinarian that I work with on a regular basis who knows my animals in operation? And if they're not sure, they can talk to their veterinarian and say, do we have a VCPR? Sometimes veterinarians will ask, to sign a form, and it's not required, but it's not uncommon. And it is a good way to get the conversation going and make sure everyone's on the same page.
And I think having a good relationship with your veterinarian is really a key piece to this. And so whenever, it's really easy as a producer to kind of handle a lot of the little things, okay, and only call the veterinarian whenever you've got a wreck on your hands, all right? Mm-hmm. And probably those conversations ought to take place a few more times during the year than just when that wreck, in the middle of the night, and I got a dystocia going on and I can't get it, and all of a sudden, and that veterinary feed directive also requires a veterinary client-patient relationship. Is that right?
Yes.
So what's the most effective thing that a producer can do to avoid drug residues?
Well, I'm kind of partial, but I think involving your veterinarian in all your treatment decisions, that's what they're trained to do, and that's their expertise. And so, and they want to help farmers, choose the right drug and treat their animals as best as possible. So that involve your veterinarian, and then make sure you know the withdrawal time for every drug on your farm. Even if it's a labeled drug and you think you know what the withdrawal time is, having that written down somewhere or knowing ahead of time what that will be before you treat an animal, so you know how long you're going to have to keep the animal, and then keep good records. Keep it written down somewhere so everyone on the farm is on the same page and knows what animal's gotten what drug or when they're clear for slaughter.
Debbie,
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us today and talking about drug residues.
The next thing that I'm going to do is this particular chute has a squeeze mechanism, okay, or what some people call a crush, all right? This one is done by chain, all right? And it works very, very well, all right? And so I can bring it, okay, and tighten the animal down. And basically what that does is it helps the animal become secure, all right? It can't move around very much. It's still comfortable. The good thing about a manual chute is that I can't put too much pressure on the animal. If I was using a hydraulic chute, I theoretically could put too much pressure on the animal. Pretty hard to do if you're doing this manually. Now, one of the challenges from a safety standpoint is that if the animal is in there, you've got pressure on this, okay, so the animal's inside, there's pressure on these gates, these outside gates. If I go like this and the animal moves, all right, I can run my hand right through this and take my finger off. All right, so you always hold on to the handle when you're making this go. All right, very important piece, right? The other thing that I would suggest is that from a safety perspective is that some chutes are designed with a brisket bar. All right, and basically the animal walks across, okay, so the bar comes up in the middle of the chute, okay, on the floor, and it basically keeps the animal from going down. All right, some animals, you get in here, they want to kneel down on their front end, and so now if you're trying to preg check or palpate a cow, you're trying to do it down on an angle. All right, the brisket bar keeps the cattle up. All right, pretty nice feature. Okay, both safety for the animal's perspective and from the human side perspective. Another safety feature of the squeeze chute is that if you look along the floor, notice that there are rods. Okay, that could be slats of metal, it could be slats of wood, whatever, but those slats down here, okay, these bars, help the animal feel secure and prevent them from sliding and slipping, okay, in the squeeze chute. So that's an important feature. Again, make sure that those are in good repair before we start. Here's a brisket bar, all right? This one happens to be removable, okay? So if you're running, for example, baby calves and this is too tall, you could take it out. But if you're running cows and you're doing a preg check, okay, or you're trying to AI, the brisket bar is really a nice feature from the standpoint of keeping the animal from going down. For some of our management practices, we have to work with the head. For example, putting in an ear tag, or maybe placement of an implant, or maybe using a tattoo. And so animal head movement becomes an issue. Okay, from a safety standpoint, if you look at the way this head gate is designed, it has parallel bars. All right, there's others that have a wide opening space, okay, coming down the length, okay, where it actually holds the animal's neck a little bit more secure. This one happens to be parallel bars. I like it because animals, if they go down in the chute, they don't choke. All right, so I do like the parallel bars, but the disadvantage is that I have a tremendous amount of up and down head movement. So there are times that I want to use a halter. And if you're going to put a halter on an animal, all right, you do not want to stand in front of the halter. You want to stand over to the side, all right, and be able to slip the halter underneath the animal's nose and over the ears because of this up and down movement. And there is a little bit of side movement as well. So you've got to be careful that an animal doesn't come up with their head while you're trying to put the halter on and get smashed in the chin, nose, face, right? So once we get the animal haltered, all right, many of the chutes have a cleat over here on the side. So what it allows me to do is to be able to bring the animal's head over, okay? And basically what you do is you do this in a circle 8, okay? And then take the rope, twist it, and bring it down on itself, all right? And that becomes now very, very secure, all right? So again, once the animal is head gated, you get the halter on and you do it from the side. You bring this over, you do a circle 8, and then you can take the rope, basically twist it and create a loop, put it over the hook, and pull it tight. In production and management tips for all cow herds, one should consider treating for lice. Now is the time where lice become a real problem. Cows are going to be scratching on about everything, losing their hair, okay, and may actually rub enough to create some skin lesions that could cause some infections. If you're going to treat for lice, consider using an oil-based pyrethroid for longer residual control. If you're not using an oil base, you may need to treat these cattle twice, about 3 weeks apart. The logic here is that when you treat, you'll destroy the active lice, but you won't have any control over the eggs that have been deposited. So coming back 3 weeks later will catch that generation of lice. Make sure that you do not undertreat. Okay, so use the recommended dosage for the weights that you have. Also, another consideration is to monitor changes in cow body condition score and make nutritional adjustments. Also consider feeding areas that will minimize mud. That may mean that you need to move your hay feeder from time to time so that it's a less muddy situation. Also realize that energy requirements increase as the wind chill drops. So that may require that you do some additional supplementation. Clean, fresh, unfrozen water supplies are also a critical piece. If cattle don't drink, they don't eat. Another consideration is to prepare for frost seeding of your pastures in February and March, ordering your seed supplies, etc. Also, another consideration is winter application of manure. Okay, don't forget the setbacks from waterways and bodies of water, and also make sure that you kind of keep a track of how many loads of manure that you haul and about the quantity of manure that your spreader will hold. Keep those on file, because if a neighbor would complain, all right, and you get an inspection, you have done your due diligence, and this will help protect you. In spring calving cow herds, make sure that you keep your replacement heifers gaining. Okay, our target is about 60 to 65% of mature weight going into the beginning of the breeding season. Make sure that your heifers are on target to reach that level of weight. Body condition score your cows, and any cows that are thin, you need to think about supplementing them to move them towards a body condition score 5. You may also consider vaccinating your cow herd for scours if that's been a problem in the past. Also prepare facilities and equipment for your upcoming calving season. Make sure that that includes a clean, dry place for newborns and protection of calves after they get up and going from mud and wind chill. Another consideration is begin checking your cow herd closely at least 10 days before their due dates, because some of these cows are going to calve early. Another consideration is making sure that you have adequate colostrum intake. Now that hopefully will be taken care of by mom, okay, after she calves and the calf gets up and nurses. But you may need to have a bag of colostrum replacer, not a substitute, not a supplement, but a colostrum replacer. That typically has 100 grams of IgG, and that's what you need to be looking for, or more. In fall calving cow herds, consider windbreaks and shelter for your calves. We still have some cold weather around the corner. Make sure that you maintain cows in moderate body condition, and the reason for that is that these cows are probably now in their first trimester of pregnancy, and the developing fetus can be programmed by cow nutrition. So if that cow is losing weight, okay, that could have a negative effect on how that calf in utero develops, and some of the really important tissues like reproductive tissues, muscle tissues, heart and lungs, brain, those kinds of things are rapidly developing in that first trimester of pregnancy. Also consider calfhood vaccinations for your calf crop. Another consideration is to evaluate how your calves are doing. If the calves are starting to look a little bit off, they're not gaining quite like you'd want, maybe you need to consider creep feeding, or maybe even early weaning the calves, okay, and feeding the calf directly versus feeding the cow for lactation. If you take the calf away and you eliminate lactation, the cow requirements for maintenance drop dramatically. In upcoming programs and events, we have 2 Purdue programs that might be of value to you. The first one is Beef Basics. It's an 8-week-long, 2 hours per week program offered virtually. It begins on January 19th at 6:30 and it will end by about 8:30. Registration has a URL, and we have placed that also in the show notes below. Registration fee is $40, and the deadline for registration is Sunday, January 17th. The second program is Pasture Weed Control Virtual Field Day. It is scheduled for February 1 at 7 o'clock p.m. And again, in the show notes below, we have listed the URL for your registration for that program. That one is a free one. Another upcoming program is the Cattle-Fax Trends plus Cow-Calf Virtual Webinar. This is a free program. It begins at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, January 27th, and registration can be obtained through the website listed here and also in the show notes below. Hoosier Beef Congress is still on target for happening February 19 to 21. Now, the Indiana Beef Cattle Convention has had to be postponed to a later date because of COVID restrictions at the Hendricks County Fairgrounds. But the Indiana Beef Cattle Business Meeting has been scheduled for Saturday, February 20th at 10 a.m. at the Hoosier Beef Congress at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. And the reason for that schedule is that the bylaws of the Indiana Beef Cattle Association says that we have to have an officer election and policy resolution vote at a business meeting. And so that's why that meeting is set for Saturday, February 20th at 10 a.m. at Hoosier Beef Congress. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association Convention, scheduled for late February, early March, was rescheduled to August 10 to 12 in Nashville, Tennessee. The registration website is listed here, and it also appears in our show notes below. Now, another feature that NCBA instituted is the 2021 Cattle Industry Convention Reboot. This will be a virtual program offered February 23rd and 24th. I've listed the website for that activity, which also includes the agenda for that program, here on this slide, but also in the show notes below.
This presentation was a production of the Animal Science Department at Purdue University.